As it happens with every new region, in Fontaine new free-to-play craftable weapons are coming out. Generally, free-to-play weapons of a specific region fit a specific theme, which suits their region of origin. In Fontaine's case, the theme is healing. All of the new weapons have their passive tied to the weapon holder receiving heals, which is a condition that looks sensical if you look at Linné and Lynette's kits, since they have the means to heal themselves and potentially activate these passives. From a more general viewpoint, however, requiring healing for activation might momentarily put them in a weird spot. From a team building standpoint, the healer that takes place in the vast majority of optimal teams is Bennett. Bennett's healing only applies to the active character, and only when his HPs fall below 70%, which are two conditions that definitely might get in the way of the weapons I'm going to show. Of course, there are other healers in the game that get used, like Kokomi, Jean, Barbara, and the recently released Baiju. These characters have some usage in optimal teams, but they're definitely more niche in that role compared to Bennett, who manages to be an offensive staple in a lot of teams while filling the healer role very well. Let's see these weapons now. Let me preface that I'm going to consider these weapons at Refinement 5. Fontaine Sword completely revolves around providing its holder with a lot of attack buffs. It has an attack percent main stat, and will activate an attack percent buff when the holder uses an elemental skill. This action will also make the active character enter a status where when 24% of his maximum HP gets healed, a fraction of the total amount healed gets converted into a flat attack buff. Right off the bat, looking at the potential users of this weapon, characters like Ayaka or Keqing jump out, as they get to share teams with the likes of Kokomi or Baiju, so healers that aren't as conditional as Bennett. Still, somebody like Ayaka might have troubles activating the passive effects efficiently. The healing passive starts only when Ayaka uses her elemental skill, and many probably like to use Ayaka's burst right away in that scenario, to pre-funnel the energy particles generated. In that situation, Kokomi doesn't have enough time to heal Ayaka and activate the passive before the elemental burst is used, also because it will likely take Kokomi 2 healing procs for that to happen. Even hypothesizing an alternative rotation where Ayaka uses her skill a few seconds before the burst, things aren't looking pretty, since accounting for realistic uptime, the new weapon is still below Amenoma. For Keqing, things are a bit better. She always starts her rotations with her elemental skill, and on quickened teams she should receive enough healing to immediately activate the passive for her window. However, there is also a chance the Dendro healing might not be available for her second on-field window, which will make things quite bad for her. Assuming full uptime of this weapon on Keqing, it can reach Black Sword Refinement 1 levels of damage, which isn't too bad for a free-to-play option. Another scenario is Lynette in Mono Anemo teams. Lynette is a special case because with her elemental skill, she immediately heals herself by 25%, so she procs the passive immediately. With full passive uptime, the Fontaine Sword is able to match Black Sword here as well. Basically, when its uptime is consistent, this weapon can contend with some of the best 4-star options in the slot, but this is often impossible. The Catalyst is a bit better than the Sword, since it provides an elemental damage buff with its passive, which scales much better in most teams than all that attack. It works very similarly to the Sword passive activation wise. Yae is probably the character that can take advantage of this the best, by being on a team with unconditional healers like Baiju. Assuming consistent uptime for her with this weapon, it actually does pretty well, which is nice considering she always lacked low budget options outside of Witsit. Specifically, it's 3% below an average passive Refinement 5 Witsit, which is the second best option for Yae overall. For characters like Cleo and Wanderer, it's a bit weirder, since they are on Bennett teams, which makes the passive activation time quite vague in practice. In Cleo's case, assuming that somehow the passive gets almost full uptime, the weapon can contend with Witsit here as well. For Wanderer, so a character that gets plenty of damage buffs thanks to Feruzan in his artifact set, the weapon's passive doesn't scale very well, and ultimately is considerably below the likes of Witsit here. The Polearm is quite peculiar compared to the other weapons in this set, since it has a HP% main stat and gives a big energy refund every time the character is healed. with a cooldown of 8 seconds. This is actually a pretty useful archetype for a few characters. While it's not better than Favonius when you need more energy for the entire team, it performs way better when you just need more energy on the weapon holder. In Yayao's case, this weapon can basically nullify your energy requirements on Dendro teams, granted you have her Constellation too, and in Candace's case it gets pretty close to that. Definitely a weapon you might want to craft if you think you need this level of comfort. The Claymore will just provide the holder with an attack percent buff whenever it gets healed, with no conditions of activations. This passive suits Eula teams with Mika decently, since Mika's healing effects apply following the active character's normal attacks, unconditionally, meaning it's pretty easy for Eula to get full uptime of the passive that way. Still, even accounting for that, the weapon performs worse than Refinement 1 Akumaru on Eula, and it just competes decently with other free-to-play options. Alternatively, characters like Beidou or Diluc can use it, but the situation isn't any better here, also because all Claymore characters have access to Serpent Spine, which is just too good to beat as it's comparable to 5-star options in most cases. The bow, just like the Claymore, will provide a buff whenever the holder is healed, but this time it's a damage buff. This weapon can sort of compete with Viridescent Hunt on most characters, granted you can activate its passive regularly, which is easier said than done. Specifically, a character like Child, who front-loads most of his damage in the rotation through his burst, will likely miss on those buffs for a big portion of his damage. On Yoimiya, it's a bit below Rust Refinement 1 even with full uptime, and on Fischl it's just in range with Refinement 1 Stringless. I'm done for today. Overall, these new weapons can compete with good 4-star options in their best case scenario, but the dominant presence of a healer like Bennett in the meta makes their activation consistency unpredictable on many characters. Things might get better if Fontaine introduces more unconditional healers that can fade traditional teams without lowering their damage potential, but as of right now, these weapons are just pretty niche. See you in the next video.